Setting. Setting is the environment in which you're putting your story. Typically, you'll have a lot of different settings because you may have a lot of different chapters and each one has a different setting. That's the case with my books. I like to do that because it gives me more things to describe, and I'll talk about descriptions in a minute because you got to be careful with those. But when I choose a setting for a chapter, I try to choose the environment so that it reflects the emotions the character is feeling. So if there's coming to a scary part and Game Night 999 is kind of scared, then I might choose a dark, spooky, shadowy forest. I like the roofed forests in Minecraft because the leaves go all the way across, and so it creates a lot of shadows. There can be a lot of monsters hiding in there. But there's cool stuff you can describe because they have the big red mushrooms in there. So you have big red mushrooms that stand out in contrast to the green leafy canopy. So you can do some description there and do some flowery little poetic kind of descriptions, and I'll put a sentence or two like that when I describe this. But I will focus on the shadows because if this is something that Game Night is worried about, I want the environment to reflect the kind of emotions that he's having. If he's feeling lonely, then maybe that scene will be in the desert. And there's a hot, empty desert. And he feels lonely because no one understands him, blah, blah, blah. But the only things out there that we can describe are I will frequently say the green prickly cactus are standing guard across the hot and dry wasteland, or the dried bushes rustling in the constant east to west wind, because there's always a wind that goes from east to west in Minecraft. So you can talk about the rustling of the leaves. And so I can do a little bit of description there to set the tone for that setting. And I can talk about the sand dunes, and I can talk about it being dusty and dry and hot, but that kind of sets the tone for that chapter, and that's important to have the right tone for the chapter. You don't want the character to be happy and skipping and eating a lollipop in the middle of a dry desert where there's no one around. That kind of doesn't make sense, and there's a disconnect there, and that would hurt your story flow. So you want to try to have the setting match the emotions of the character. Maybe doing it opposite like that, you do that for a reason, because you want to create anxiety in the reader because you're going to have a resolution coming after the end of that. So maybe that would be good. That would take some experiment, but it would be good to do. But when you write these scenes and you choose the setting for your scene, it's important that you write to all of the senses as much as you can. This is what I hear from kids, that they really like my books because they're immersive and they feel like they're really in the story. And that's because I write not just about what they see, but I also write about what they hear, I write about what they feel, I write about what they smell. I try to write taste, though taste is difficult because we don't talk much about what they eat in Minecraft, though you do eat stuff, but yeah, it's really not that big of a part of the game, so I don't stress that as much. So when I have an area that he's going into, I'll talk about what it looks like. You know, sunsets are good because you get these beautiful colors that are changing, but at one point the sky, you see a line of red along the horizon, red like blood. Ooh, scary. So you can add a little bit of tension to your description. And then you see the stars come out and you got the moon, so there's things you can describe. You can also talk about what it sounds like with the wind causing the leaves to rustle, or maybe you hear the cows and sheep in the distance, or maybe you hear the moans of zombies and the clattering of skeleton bones because creatures are around. So it's easy to describe what you see, it's easy to describe what you hear. What you feel takes more thought. So if you want to talk about how rough the bark of the trees are, Game Night has to lean against a tree to do that in order to feel it. Or maybe he's walking through a grassy plain and he can feel the blades of grass rubbing against his armor or rubbing against his feet or something like that. It's important to really focus the description on the senses because that's what's really going to draw the reader into the story, and that's super, super important. Now let's talk about how much you do. If you spend 2 paragraphs on description, you're going to dramatically reduce the pace of your story, and you're going to bore your reader. So I try to do maybe 2 sentences of description, and then I go into dialogue, or I go into some action, or I go into something happening, and then I throw in a little more description, a sentence here, a sentence there. I try to spread the description out as much as possible. If you have a big giant page, which I just read a book that I was trying to learn how he does description, and this was The Sword of Shannara, a great fantasy book by, I don't remember who the author is. I don't remember. But he has pages and pages of description, and it can be really hard to read through them because they're not terribly interesting. I already have an idea for what a castle looks like on a hill, and I'd rather think about what my castle looks like, not what his castle looks like. So he doesn't need to tell me what a castle looks like. He is I don't want to say that he's a bad writer. This is a fantastic book. I've read it multiple times. I would encourage all kids to read The Sword of Shannara if you like fantasy genre, because it is just fantastic. But you need to consider your audience, and that's not written for young kids, and young kids will not get through that kind of description. So you need to make sure you put enough description so you can draw the reader into the story, but not put so much in that you start to bore them, because it's important that you keep the pace going in the story. You want to feel like you're constantly being propelled forward through the story. There's up times when you're fighting and battling and it's exciting, and then there's down times when they're sad because something happened. But you always want to keep a forward momentum going in the story. And if you have too much description, you will kill that momentum, and you will make the story feel like it's slowing down, and the reader will get bored, and the reader will close the book. And that's the death of your story. You don't want them to close the book. You don't want them to skip sections because it's just a bunch of flowery descriptions, because as soon as they start skipping sections, they're getting ready to think about what's the next book they're going to read, because this one is not holding their interest. So description is tough, and it takes practice to learn how much is good. Too much is bad, not enough is bad. It's got to be just right. Like I said earlier, with the 3 bears, the baby bear's bed was just right, and this is the same thing here. The description has to be just right to make the story work. It takes practice, a lot of practice, and after you've written 1,000,000 words, you'll start to figure it out. But it takes a lot of practice, and so the first times you'll do it, you won't do it right, and that's okay, because you'll learn from it. Thanks.